everybody, welcome to our performing class. What a wonderful opportunity to enter the kitchen of music making. And today our wonderful chef, wonderful violinist and professor, friend, Olga Kaler.
Thank you. Thank you. Спасибо вам. I am honored to be here, and I'm very happy to have all of you with me here. So I will leave a little bit of time at the end in case any of you want to get into the ingredients. Now that I am a chef, you know, let's talk cooking. If anyone wants to ask questions about the how and why and what of the violin playing, we can, you know, so while you're listening to your amazing colleagues, you can think up the questions that we could address at the end. Thank you. And our first, Michelle Bushkova, third movement of Schubert Duo. thank you so much. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's a huge progress even since we did work on it yesterday. I would like to talk to you about several things. One of which is when and how to release the note so it doesn't completely disappear. Because I can see and I can hear that you have the right intentions, but sometimes the execution doesn't match what is in your mind. For instance, when you play the beginning, you want it to be light, you want it to be elegant. That comes across. What doesn't come across, the note dies before its time. You know, so think of it, think of each A that you play as more of a dotted 16th. You know, more of a... And then even longer. If you agree that this phrase is 1 + 1 + 2, then you can't keep stopping because you get 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. You see what I mean? So for us to put the last two bars together, it needs to be even more sustained than what you would do in the first two bars. But even the first two bars, you know, you're playing down bow, so think of your thumb moving like as if you were playing Kaler stroke. In the meantime, turning the stick for you, laying more hair down on the string, which will make it so much easier to sustain. Let's do the beginning one more time. Think about how you start. You're giving yourself an upbeat which is so fast and abrupt that, of course, your bow is going to move too fast. Stay closer to the string and go. And then... So you sink into the string at the same rate, you see?
Yeah, sorry.
Allow the phrase to cave quite so much, because I think it would be really elegant to bridge the gap between two phrases by connecting them. You see, so you're playing don't let it die. You see, and then it's sort of like a mirror image, you know? You got so soft that your last long note, it resurfaced above the previous ones. So be a little more mindful. Use your thumb, sustain. You see, so when you get to the last note, you don't have to do, you know, it gets, you know, I was privileged to play with Xiaozhe, one of the greatest conductors that I ever came across. And he would say, never play softer or louder than beautiful. You know, you have to be aware of your current comfort zone, right? I mean, we grow and develop all our lives, but right now you know where your comfort zone lies, right? What your dynamic range is. So stay inside that. Don't go like into the abyss on both sides, you know, where it gets uncomfortably loud or uncomfortably soft, because you lose traction a little bit. So would you please play just the end of that phrase? You know, stay in through the 30-second notes. Okay, let's talk about that. It's too ballistic. First of all, it makes the chord too short. Second, you know, Schubert's sound, I think in this movement especially, it requires certain mellowness of articulation. don't make any abrupt ballistic gestures because they provoke you into a rougher articulation and the note which you cannot live with until it really ends. So go, and then bird sings, you know, like really chirp, same thing, you know, get into the string. Consider the chord as two connected double stops, you know, like a, right, so through one string. Very good. So, you know, you're kind of, as a pianist, you would know that. You're sandwiched between the two hands of the piano. And even though he's so delicate and really perfectly able to balance to you, there's nothing you can do. You are the one in the middle register, and middle register on violin tends to be a little bit dull. I don't mean dull, I mean just, it doesn't project very well. You know, it didn't come out right. So what does it need? It needs more resistance in a sound. Yours is a little too lightweight. You see, so when you're done with this, let's go. You know, also a little slower bow speed for second and third notes, so we hear right? There's a vocal line in that as well. Go ahead. Yes, it's beautiful, but it's too much bow. You need roughly half of it. Try again. Play into the string. That's it. Crescendo. More crescendo. More crescendo. Forte. Right. So, as you know from this music or any other, the word diminuendo means you just arrived at the loudest spot you will ever have. So this isn't a contrasting echo dynamic. This is a mirror image dynamic. So you build up and then you build back down. So don't apologize for it. You know, when you go here, I'm backwards. And again, triplets, you know, a little bit more released. One day, I'm hoping to convince you that you don't need quite so many bow changes. You know, you're overestimating how much bow you really need. You know, if you, when you get here, you know, to me, the last one is the only one that really needs two bows. You know, so you would arrive here. Let's try one more time. You know, just take a chance on it. Don't rush. So it's very beautiful. I just want to say, don't look at black notes in the music and process them as passages. It's all melody, you know, that's what Schering was once asked, you know, how he plays passages so beautifully. And he said, I never play passages, I only play melodies. So should you. You see, if you, you know, when you're sight reading, you have to think ahead. You're not sight reading right now. Play every note like you are really sorry to part with it. It especially works in Schubert. You have to play every note like it's your last, you know? Try one more time. In the middle, right? You're the one with the pulse, which is sorely needed here. You know, so a little bit more, it's like a lullaby, you know, there has to be this rocking feel, you know, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, you know. That's where I need your infamous diminuendo. Until then, give me a little bit more substance in the sound. You know, it's going to help your partner as well, because it's only so soft. As you know, on piano, it's only so soft you can play before the key doesn't respond at all. So don't put him in that position. Go ahead. Bow speed is too fast. Sounds a little ballistic. One more thing. Please don't accent downbeat. Don't play. It was too much. For me, it's too much, you know. And slower bow speed on a chord. You know, it should never feel like a chord. You know, it has to be that kind of like an exhale. Just do that little snippet for me. Yes. This is much better than the previous time. Let me just tell you one thing before I get out of your hair. It's natural for us to move our hand like this. It's not natural at all to move the other way. If you stay at the level of your upper string, you leave yourself no choice but to go like this, and you go too far. You see, so instead, hang on to your lower string, whatever it is, A or E, and you go on. You see, then it's going to be no problem, because your hand will just gently lower itself, but your arm will always be on the level of the lower string. Try just that passage and that's it. Stay with... Okay, yeah, so think about that. Also, when we have string crossings, whatever string you're crossing to, it behaves like a trampoline. It's trying to reject your bow. So the weight that must be applied to your index finger is much greater than you think, even in piano. When we play piano on a single string, it's significantly lighter than when you have string crossings like that, which is what makes it more difficult right now. Okay? Thank you so much for playing. Absolutely beautiful. Pardon me?
Would you like a score?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So I can stand next to you. Very beautiful. So, for the most part, I like your ideas very much, but I would like to help you do some of the things you're doing with better quality. Let's talk about the beginning. You know, very often when we play up bow, we don't realize that we're setting ourselves up for a ponticello down bow. When a person of your size and your arm proportions and everything plays up bow, it's best, as I mentioned to you at the lesson, to immediately to move the arm. Like, imagine this is a pendulum, right? That just swings right in front of your body, not on a side. You see, this joint is kind of miraculous, right? We can do this 360 degrees. We can also do this right in front of you, also 360 degrees. It's designed to move either in front of you or on a side of you, you know. So this is not something that can ever cause discomfort or injury. And for a smaller person, you know, this is what I usually advise to most of my female violinists who tend to be, you know, shorter and the upper arm would be shorter. When you move away from the tip, the first quarter of a bow, move without bending your elbow. You see, because this way your arm moves from the side of your body to the front. So now you're perfectly set up to get to the frog without your bow fishtailing. You see, so when you start this, go straight. Now stay right here. Change color. You see, then lift violin, so when you get to E string, you'd be above the string, not on the side of it. You see, your instrument, you know, I mean, I wish you didn't have a shoulder rest, but this is a conversation for another time. I hope you will consider getting rid of it. But even with the shoulder rest, open up your shoulders, bring the violin up and slightly to the left, which would raise your E string and allow your arm to stay pretty much on the same level it was when you played on lower string. You see, let's try beginning one more time. So every time you play up bow, just talk to yourself in very practical terms. You know, don't think about rainbows and fish, that will come later. Think like pendulum. Okay, let me tell you one more thing. So you're going from E string to A, and yet you're dropping your elbow. Why would you drop your elbow? You're about to go to the lower string. You know, much as I love talking about music and character and everything, which is terribly important, but it's a very physical process, violin playing, right? No matter how much we feel about certain piece of music and how specific everything is in our head, it all boils down to choosing from the technical arsenal you have the correct tools to express what you're feeling. So when you go, this E string, arm goes up. You see, because otherwise the string chokes if you start hanging on it. And you do because your elbow is at the same level it was, you know, you dropped it going to the front. You see, so you know how to swim?
Yes.
All right. right? So you'd be making roughly this motion, right? So keep making it. That's the essence of the string crossing. When you go from E string to some other string, that's how you move, just a little smaller. Do it again. Don't lower your arm. Right, so let's talk about shifts and why they're uncomfortable. In your case, they're uncomfortable because you keep violin exactly where it is. First of all, let's talk about timing. When you have a long shift, if you were a singer, you'd be switching from diaphragm to the throat, or at least this is what one of the singers I respect very much explained to me. You know, what happens like internally. So this is our version of switching from diaphragm to the throat. So you need time for that to happen. You know, if you were singing, you would actually need time physically, but we need time to prepare the arm, to prepare the correct violin angle. And, you know, so if you move the arm in, for all intents and purposes, your shift is already done. So when you go, then it's not that far. You know, same thing when you go here. You see, if your violin is flat and your arm is out, then it's a very short distance. Now, if you're like this, then suddenly there are 17 positions on violin and you have to reach for it, you know, kind of with a claw. You see what I mean? And it gets very uncomfortable and very scary. So please take a chance on me, just once. And before your shift, talk to yourself, very practically tell yourself, okay, take more time on a note before the shift, lift the violin, bring it to the left. Just 3 things. Go ahead.
This part was switching, yeah, before.
As I mentioned to you yesterday, it would be great if you could just play on 3 strings. Let me show you what to do on open strings. Put the bow closer to fingerboard on middle string, right? That's your technique. Not this. You know, I wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? You know, that basically you have to have, when you get a little more comfortable with left hand, so you can switch quickly, right now you're alternating fingers a little bit. If you can be a little quicker with your left hand, I would recommend not breaking quite so much. When you play in double stops, you're trying to articulate every note, wah, 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 wah. I wouldn't do that either. I would lean on lower note and play legato as if you're just playing 8th notes in a bow. Would you be so kind as to do a little bit of that? Do what you can for now with the chords, because it probably will need a little more time for left hand. But double stops you can do right now without stopping in between.
Okay.
Yeah, from there. Lean on lower string. You know, Very good. So what will help it even more is if you stay on the level of the two lower strings and just drop your wrist a little bit towards upper string. Don't reach up. It takes longer and it's less efficient. Yes. Okay, so I would love to work on chords, so I'll just mention something here. When you're playing this, instead of lifting the bow, go like this. Drop your arm into the first chord and let the second one bounce off of it. So, and stay right at the frog, because it's a little bit, it's not as clean as you could do. You know, you're lifting a little bit high and you lose traction, okay? Now, but what I really wanted to say about number 4, when you're playing, now, I need equal articulation, as I told you, because this is, if you jump, then what? Then, you know, it gets a little bit too on the string. You know, it needs to be more equal. So you see, stay on for all of it. However, when you get to this bar, this is where you keep it absolutely legato. Don't keep articulation. You know, so, you know, sorry, I'm cycling. You know, so that needs to be smooth. You know, because he actually writes legato on the 16th note passage, which gives you a pretty good clue what needs to happen later. Even though material looks similar, it's actually in contrast to yo-pa-pom, you know, the beginning is really articulate, this isn't. Okay? I'm really sorry we have to stop. Beautiful playing. Thank you so much. very beautiful. I know this is still a relatively new piece for you. So let's talk about a little bit of structure plus, some technical things which we can implement to make it a little bit easier. What I would really like to do is help you coordinate your vibrato with your bow speeds. You have really beautiful vibrato, but it tends to be a little bit fast before it needs to be that fast, you see? And so basically your left hand is provoking your bow into the kind of bow speed that makes you run out of bow. Whenever you have a long note which you would like to open up, start with very reserved vibrato, because it's impossible to save the bow if your vibrato is fast or, God forbid, wide, you see? So when you start, even though, it says mezzo forte espressivo, but it can mean so many different things. You see, think of that note as a rosebud. And like imagine you put a camera in front of the rose and you leave it for a couple of days. And then you put it on fast forward and you watch that rosebud open right in front of your eyes. That's how I would like you to think of that first note. Not as a rival, but a possibility. You see, allow it to be a journey somewhere else. You see, so more of a... Now, you like to kind of paint yourself into a corner a little bit. You didn't use enough bow and then you ran out, So, I can kind of give you a general idea how I decide on the bowings. If I have longer note, if I want it to be crescendo, other than this first note, obviously it needs to be down bow because it's a strong bar, strong beat, so obviously. But in other places, if I have a long note, if it's possible to play up bow, it's probably a better solution, because if you're going away from the tip, you have unlimited possibilities. You won't be hemmed in by the tip. Leaving yourself upper quarter of the bow to, do something significant with a relatively long note is probably not very practical. So let's start from the beginning one more time. And whatever your bowing is, either change it so your long notes would go up bow, or get a little lower so you have more to play with. You see, like, that note is not supposed to die. I prefer bowing. You see, and another bow. And another bow. You see, I don't know, I just, personally, I feel more secure this way, because, stage is a funny thing, sometimes you feel differently or you don't feel terribly comfortable. Up bow will never betray you, down bow will. Just something to think about, because you're so extraordinarily talented. You're going to spend your entire life on stage. So this is an advice. I'm not talking down on you. It's an advice from an older colleague who already made all the same mistakes and learned from them. Try to think a little bit more in terms of security when it comes to implementing your ideas without the possibility of a failure. You understand? Some things are foolproof, such as the up bows on a long note. Let's try one more time.
So you're going now?
If you can. beautiful. So now you're so musical that you feel like things are not enough all the time. And it's not unusual for us to feel like, well, if I just articulate every note, it's going to be more expressive. I believe the most expressive of all expressive devices we've got is legato. You know, if you play, let's see, if you play, you see, it sounds, for me, overly articulated. When you go here, by the way, ascending shifts should be done, when possible, from down bow to up bow. So your arms move towards each other. Going in the same direction is never really a good idea, and it's hard to sustain. You know, so just another thing, it's beyond Barber concerto, it's for everything. So when you do this, I think it's more secure, and it allows you, because I can hear what you want. You're not going to get it with that bowing, and you're not going to get it by playing portato. Okay? Would you be so kind as to start from here? Thing as well, lower strings. If we just play with the weight of the bow, listen. What do you think of my sound now?
It's weak.
It's clean, right? Though.
Yeah.
It's clean, there's nothing wrong with it. But would you say it's really impersonal? Because I'm not doing anything to make it personal. Anybody can sound like that. See, if I want you to hear how I feel about this piece and what I feel at that given moment when I'm on lower strings, I would use my index finger and my thumb. You know, when you play down bow, I think of my thumb as the mechanism that pulls the bow and index finger that pushes it, right? So when you get here, stay in a string, thumb, index. See, even the top D, I'm simply using less bow. I am not playing lightly. Because if you play lightly, you get this kind of a generic personal sound. There is so much more to you, you know. So try this again. Feel like there is a resistance, you know, that there is like this constant, you're not just allowing the violin to hand you whatever sound is there. You take it. You understand? Try again.
From here?
Sure, that's good. Get into the string. Stay in a string. Okay, I would like to work on something else, but I'll just mention this much. You have a tendency to release the bow after each note. You cannot. That's how you get portato, by releasing and having to re-engage your index finger. Imagine you're writing with a pencil, right? To draw a straight line, you would need to apply constant pressure to your index finger. It works the same way with the bow, with the sound production. If you released, this is it, you're confusing the string. It doesn't know what you want anymore, you see? And then you have to work exceptionally hard to keep the sound clean. So instead of abusing your ear and telling it, I don't like the sound, do something. So you play portato. You see, no matter how many notes you have in your left hand, your bow has just one. You see, that's it, and keep it down. Because otherwise you get these noises between the notes and you don't need any of that. Anyway, I'll let you think about that. Let's talk about string crossings, because that sort of continues the same idea about the thumb and index finger. As I told a person before you, when we have string crossings, the hand needs to be considerably heavier than if you simply play a long note on one string. You know, I could do this and get a good sound. Now, if I have to go, it's a much more involved for the index finger, because the bow needs to be slightly suppressed. Otherwise, it will never be clean. You know, the new string to which you're crossing, it acts like a trampoline and it tries to reject the bow. So why am I telling you this? When you're playing this, getting to you see, even though I don't really want to play very loud, but if I did what I was just doing on one string, it would probably be fortissimo. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So work a little bit harder to keep the stick suppressed, because otherwise you're getting a little bit of a... You see how it doesn't really connect? You want it to sound like you're on one string. Would you be so kind as to do that, please? So pay a little more attention to lower strings, tenuto, on second notes. Now think of this one. You have to, you know, the G string is thicker than D, so you have to work harder for the G string. Also, timing. Trust Barber a little bit more. You're doing more than necessary. I would do pretty much what's written. You know, when you get here... on one note, F sharp at the end. I think it's enough. Now, another place where I think you can trust Barber a little bit more, when you get to you know, so we do like a tiny bit in the beginning, tiny bit at the end. The rest of it, it has to feel like a mountain creek. You know, it just meanders around the rocks, very light bow, and you just sort of stay out of the way and let it weave its way around. You understand? That was a little, for my taste, too involved. Would you be so kind as to start from here one more time? Vibrate. Thumb. So when you have ascending shifts, you know, for once you actually go in the right direction. Down bow before the shift, up bow after the shift. But your violin is hanging down. I'm thrilled to see you're not using shoulder rest, but there are many advantages you're not really taking advantage of. So when you go lift, go, bring your arm around, lift, so you would have room under the instrument. Bring your arm all the way in. So for all intents and purposes, you're done with the shift. You see, arm and... And then relax your jaw and allow the violin to tilt so that when you go on G string, you don't have to reach too high. You see, there's a lot of flexibility there. You can go up and down, and you can use the, you know, the tilt of the instrument to make sure that you minimize the motion of the bow arm. You know, we frequently hear about sharing that his arm was so high. It wasn't high. It's just he knew how to manipulate the angle and height of the instrument to minimize the angle of the bow arm movement so much that it looked like it was pretty much on the same level all the time. That's what I'm hoping to get with you. Can you try that? Resistance. Much better. So resistance I meant on lower strings. Okay? Very beautiful. Just one thing about number 4. You can maybe think a little bit more about the bowings you're using. Some of it looks a little bit uncomfortable. You're playing the spiccato backwards. I don't know if maybe it's worth it just to remove one of the hooks that you're using. I'll leave that up to you. But I would like to talk to you about how you shape the passage, because it's a little bit mechanical. Personally, I tend not to like very much the echo dynamics. I prefer mirror image dynamics, and I try to kind of shy away from symmetry because it's not as interesting. You know, so when you do this, you see what I mean? Like instead of it's very predictable. See if you can come up and then come down wherever you are when you arrive. Take it there and go back down. I think it might be a little bit more interesting. Could you try that? Okay. Or like that too, you know, that works. You know, as long as it's not this very straightforward echo dynamic. Fantastic. Thank you so much for playing. Beautiful. It's okay. Spectacular. Very beautiful. Thank you for playing. So, given how little time we have, I would like to focus on what I feel would be the most important things to address in your playing. What I love is the very personal sound you're producing, and you're fearless when it comes to the use of portamento and other expressive devices. There is definite, the relationship between you and the instrument is obviously without the obstacles. It's obvious from the beginning. And I love all of that, so I would like to address some things which stand in a way a little bit of you getting to what I think you envision for this piece. I was once privileged to meet this woman. Her name was Elaine Skorodin. You probably don't know the name, but this was when we lived in Chicago. She was already around 80, I would say. She was a former student of Jascha Heifetz. And from her own words, she would say, in my time, in my younger years, for a woman to have a career, you would have to do nothing short of standing on your head while playing Tchaikovsky concerto, and men around you would say, that's pretty good, and she managed to have a career, until, of course, she got married and her husband put a very quick stop to it, which is a great shame because I heard a recording of her playing Paganini concerto. Let me tell you, she could play circles around a lot of people, and I found it very humbling and inspiring, just to be near that person. We were often stand partners. She wanted to remain involved in playing violin as much as possible, so even in her 80s, she would play in orchestras where we overlapped. So why am I telling you this? She was telling me the story how she went to Scotland to play Scottish fantasy. And she says, so I am playing this. And she says, and I feel like something weird is going on. And she couldn't pinpoint what it is. She's looking left, she's looking right, she can't understand what is going on. She said, so there was an open concert hall and then a huge lawn of probably like big enough for 10,000 people. And all 10,000 people were singing this, because this is actually a Scottish song. Who would know, right? Scottish fantasy is kind of a clue. So why am I telling you this? Keep it a little bit more simple. Imagine 10,000 people singing it. They wouldn't be doing slides or rubatos or anything like that. That comes later when Bruch starts to elaborate on it and gives you the violin-y stuff so we could have fun with it. You see, so the very beginning, much as, I can just see this tidal wave going for you. You want so much. Try to want a little bit less here. Keep it simple and imagine you're just humming it. In a shower when nobody can hear. It needs to be much more simple. Then everything you do afterwards will be so much more effective. Let's try one more time. You don't have to play the whole introduction. It was really quite beautiful. Start from pick up to the actual movement, would you? Okay, so what I didn't ask you for is to keep it flat. If you were singing, you would need more air on a first note. Da, 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 dum. Now I have no air left. I need to take in more. Da, 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 dum. You see, so feel the breathing, right? If you're inhaling like a pickup, right? It's da, 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 da. Da, da, dum. So do a little bit more, which would correspond with how you would sing it. Faster bow. translucent. Yeah, see, what you can't do is make the weak part of the bar as strong as the beginning. You see, if you go... So a little bit lighter. You know, so in other words, slower bow speed when you go away from the tip. Beautiful. You see, so this needs to be presented a little bit more like this, so that when you get to other stuff, you know, where, you know, he starts basically writing variations for you. You see, now, when you play this and you exposed so many shifts unnecessarily. I would keep that simpler as well, you know, a little bit more. You know, I think the time for portamento is not yet. You know, go ahead. Sustain. You know, so let's just for a minute talk music theory. You're within da-ya-dum, one harmony. Why would you want to make crescendo? You know, Bruch was a pianist, so when a pianist gives you a slur, the strongest note of the slur would always be the first note. Now, appoggiatura, no matter what time period, Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic, post-romantic, it doesn't matter. Appoggiatura is always interpreted the same way, meaning you go away from the dissonant note. Except some cases where composer gives you crescendo, but even then, you first go away, then you can resurface. Okay? Go ahead. That's right. That's right. Now same phrasing. Before we go on, one technical detail. If you want to smoothly change the bow at the frog, especially when going, you know, basically you're going counterclockwise, right? You're going from A string up bow to E string down bow. So this is never terribly comfortable. Now, for those of us not using the shoulder rest like you know, you can tilt the instrument while you're finishing your E flat to bring the E string up and closer to the bow. So when you change, you're not really going counterclockwise. You see, so go this way. In the meantime, you see how the arm stays up. You know, you have a tendency to lower it a little bit too soon, so stay up and don't go down until like maybe 1 inch, right at the time you change. Perfect. For my taste, that was really flawless. That's beautiful. So, next thing, when you're weaving your triplets around the orchestra melody, please make sure that even if you choose to bend something somewhere, that it never disturbs the orchestra part. So if there is a long note in an orchestra, like a quarter or a half, by all means, be my guest. You can do a little bit of a rubato, but it has to be very strictly placed. You know, when I want to practice rubato, I turn on the metronome to make sure that I do it inside the beat. You know, every rubato has to have the strictest discipline. You know, rubato doesn't mean frivolous, it means free within the constraints of the beat. So let's do a little bit of the triplet section, please. The orchestra has ya-pa. If you wait for your top A flat, this is a duplet, you have a triplet. What are they supposed to do? You see, so you end up reversing the rhythmic figure. I know that to most people it would be unnoticeable, and maybe I'm splitting hair, but as a person who spent years in an orchestra, I would probably go like that if you did that. You see, so let's not go into that. You know, do it later. You have time enough. Talk to you about. I have two things to request from you here. The notes are relatively short, so that kind of shift you don't have time for. Do it faster. How would we do it faster? Note before the shift, slower bow speed, right? So now do you see what I'm trying to show you? D string, you're dropping deliberately. It's D string. I wrote you that fingering because I felt if you go all the way up, we both have modern instruments which sound a little bit choked that high up, because this isn't supposed to be all that loud, right? We're just playing ornaments around the orchestra part. So I chose that fingering to keep your violin from choking. But I would like you to think about blending the colors. When you go on, you see, there shouldn't be such a drastic difference. Go ahead. I would like to skip ahead a little bit because we're running out of time. I wanted to mention, when you get to this bar, the syncopations have to be ironclad. Don't even think about doing rubato, because you end up with the orchestra instead of across the beat. You see, would you be so kind? Start wherever comfortable. If you want time, take it at the expense of the tie, not between first and second beat, because you're losing momentum in terms of energy. You know, when you finish, right away, you know, there has to be this like visceral almost, you know, instant energy that goes into that. If you wait, it feels a little, okay, you know, you know, go ahead. May I disagree with how you place your grace notes at the end? First of all, they're so slow. Again, you're losing energy. Everything has to be measured. right? So when you get here, I would do measured 16ths, not eighths, you know? Let's try that. Ta ta tam is ya ta 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 pa 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 ta ta tam. Ya pa pa pa. It's too soon. 1, 2, 3, ya ta 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 tam. Try again. 2, 3, 4. Right. So make sure that when you start the trill, you subdivide into 16th notes. So you place it precisely. I don't think you should take any time, and I don't think you should compress it either. You really can't. Beautiful playing. Thank you so much. Спасибо вам огромное. Спасибо. О чем вы говорите? We have a few minutes for questions. I'm happy to answer if anyone has any questions. Yes. Okay, I'm very happy to answer this question. So, the thing is, shoulder rest gives you a sense of full security. So unless someone's neck is as long as a giraffe's, or your shoulders are really, really sloped, there is really never a good reason to use it. You know, imagine like someone has a tiny baby that, you know, is old enough to walk, roughly around a year old, and you bring it to the pediatrician. The pediatrician says, you have a beautiful, perfectly healthy child. It's time for them to learn to walk. Buy them crutches. It's the same thing. Most people, at least in my experience, do not need the shoulder rest. Here is what I consider harmful. Rigidity. You know, I don't mind if you use some kind of sponge, even if it's a little bit thicker than what I have. If, you know, we all need something non-slip, I think. You know, it makes it more comfortable. So you can choose a sponge of whatever thickness, you know, fits your shoulder structure, because the sponge will conform to the shape of your body. The shoulder rest will not. It just remains rigid. Now, most people feel, well, I have a long neck, I need to fill all this space. That's if you think that your violin is facing forward. Now, if your violin is facing forward and you have a shoulder rest, then your range of motion is about 90 degrees. Your right arm would be hanging down on the side, and you, for all intents and purposes, are not using the whole arm. You're using only half of it. Now, no matter, and you know, some people say, well, I'm not tall enough, my arm is short. Well, my arm is short too. We actually consider the length of the upper arm. It's more important in this case than the length of the forearm. So it's very short. You know, so I am, you know, in the category of people who could have said that, oh, I have a neck and my arm is short, and I also have these bones in my shoulders, so I need a shoulder rest. But I don't, because if you situate the instrument correctly against your neck on the collarbone and you bring it to the left, now your range of motion is actually 180 degrees. And now you can bring the arm forward, you see, and play in this direction rather than this. Now, if you play in this direction, I use the expression long arm versus short arm. If you have a long arm and your violin is more or less to the left, you see when you start moving away from the tip, you can use, you know, this is the main difference between I have switched so many people from using shoulder rest to not using it. The first thing I usually do is I teach them to play up bow correctly, because with the shoulder rest, first thing you do is you close your arm and then you try to find your way to the frog, which is probably one of the most harmful things, because you never quite cross the middle of the bow. There's always some kind of hiccup. Now, if you move the whole arm without bending it, see now my upper arm moved from being on the side to being in the front. And if I just follow the bow to the frog, I get the level that I need to have, and I can apply the weight of my entire arm into my index finger, you see, and get even sound without really much effort, because whether I want to or not, the weight of the arm is already in a bow. You see, so the Franco-Belgian concept, pull and push, right? So this is the push. We use the index finger to push. So now let me talk a little bit about the down bow. This is where approaches vary. I discovered some years ago that if I talk about thumb, instead of talking about index finger, my students never force the sound. You see, because I'm sure all of your teachers are teaching you Kaler, right? So it's such an important stroke. It's like the cornerstone of Franco-Belgian school. It's not just needed to play the actual Kaler, it's needed for sound production. We start from the frog, and the thumb, this is the thumb position at the frog. This is the thumb position at the tip. So that's why I teach Kaler obsessively to my students, because it's for everything. It's like the seed of all we do. You see, because you don't want to have the same hand shape at the frog and at the tip. So we start with the thumb that's fully flexed. We end with the thumb which is extended. I mean, it's never like this. It's never bent in. That would be the wrong thing to do, because you'd be pressing the bow away from the string. But we end up with the thumb which is bent ever so slightly. And it's otherwise known as pronation, because if that's your thumb position, then at the tip, you see where the bow gets really light, the weight of the arm can now go into your index finger. Now, if you keep your thumb flexed, sometimes, some of the teachers, that teach beginners, they miss the point. They're really good at doing this to their students. And they say, and then you have to keep your fingers round, and you have to keep your thumb flexed. I remember someone hitting me on a hand for trying to straighten my thumb towards the tip. I did it instinctively, and my teacher really didn't like it. So, but I saw the light eventually, and I thought, okay, yeah, you see, so it's not the same. At the frog, yeah, absolutely, you will look like this. But at the tip, you won't look like this. You need to pronate, and you need to make sure that you are not forcing your pinky to stay on the bow. That's another thing where I feel like there are different schools of thought. We all use standard equipment, violin, bow, all the same size, so it's a little bit unfair that someone like me or you and someone like Mr. Kaler here, who is 6 foot tall and has much longer arm, would have the same position. So what needs to happen, you have to know what's important here and what we're after. In the upper half of the bow, your pinky is useless to you. You need this. These are the 3 fingers that really produce the sound. So at one point, you're going to feel like you can no longer reach for the bow, because your hand is turned to the side. So at some point, the fingers, like the pinky, for sure, are going to unstick. And you should allow that. So when you go towards the tip, if you just think about your thumb, 2 really great things happen. It helps you pronate. And second thing, which is a little bit underappreciated, the thumb, as it straightens, it also turns the bow. And as I'm sure you heard from your teacher, flatten the hair towards the tip. Some people go ahead and do it like this, which I think is harmful, because this is very fragile here. So if you play by collapsing the wrist, eventually you're going to get carpal tunnel. I remember Mr. Silverstein was teaching a master class, and someone played from a very famous teacher who was teaching like that and who was very unhappy when his students would remove the pinky. And Mr. Silverstein said, this gives a lot of business to Massachusetts General Hospital. So, and it's absolutely true. You have to allow your pinky to go off the bow, so your wrist would stay a little bit above the bow, and you would never strain this part of the underside of your wrist, because that could be harmful. So that is like probably the most important thing about dropping the shoulder rest. The entire geometry changes. You see, you would be on this side instead of on that. And I'll just briefly mention, without the shoulder rest, you can lift violin, you have room, bring your arm in, and so now the shifts are much closer because your upper arm will lead you up. Instead of doing this, like most people with shoulder rest, they can't really move the upper arm, so they shift like that. So then there is 17 positions on violin and everything is far away. This way you fold in and everything is much closer. And last but not least, vibrato. If your arm is here, you vibrate in the direction of the string, so it will actually make these infamous circles, and it will actually ring and amplify the sound. If your arm is there, you vibrate perpendicular to the string, and so vibrato will be like winter sun. It kind of shines but doesn't warm you up. You see, it doesn't really amplify the sound or anything. So that, in a nutshell, is why, if you would like to know more, please see me outside the class. I see the ominous look on Pietro's face, so I probably should stop. So that...
So nice and thank you. I want you back.
Yeah. Anytime. Thank you.